Okay, everyone, a warm welcome on an exceptionally warm evening. So you'll have to excuse from our speakers various open windows and fans. Hopefully it won't impact on your hearing the talks. My name's Jane Webb. I'm going to be hosting the session, and this is the fourth of a series of talks on the Festival of Britain and its relationship to the Black Country. And it's a collaboration between ArtsFest with the University of Wolverhampton and the Black Country Study Centre. Okay, our speakers tonight are Dr. Jenny Gilbert and Simon Briercliffe, and I'm just going to introduce them. Jenny coordinates the Black Country Study Centre itself, and she's also a researcher at the Black Country Living Museum. She's lectured in design history and theory, and she continues to research, really interesting research on mid-century working class dress. Simon is a researcher at the Black Country Living Museum. He's also a doctoral student with the University of Birmingham on Black Country history, and he's just recently it's published a book on the history of the Black Country from 1940 to 1960. So that's great. Just to say the structure of tonight, Jen and Simon are going to do a bit of a tag team with their talk. They're going to talk for about 3/4 of an hour, and then we'll have questions and comments from you, hopefully, after. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you can see a Q&A, which has got like speech marks on it. If you click on that, you can enter a question or comment. Please feel free to do so anytime. I'll keep my eye on those, but we'll deal with them at the end. Just to say, this is recorded, this session, and it is obviously a public forum, so just be careful about very personal information on that Q&A or chat box. So I think that was it. Without further ado, I will pass you over to Jen and Simon, who are going to talk tonight about the contribution of the Black Country to the Festival of Britain. Over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Jane. And good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on what is an incredibly hot and sweaty July evening. So this evening, myself and my fellow BCLM researcher, Simon, will be sharing some of our research into the Festival of Britain in the Black Country. We began work on this back in the winter. It was part of our preparation for the museum's spring-summer seasonal programme. And we were aware that 2021 marked the 70th anniversary of the festival. And we wanted to find out more about how the festival was celebrated and marked here in the Black Country. And that research culminated in a mini Festival of Britain, or Festival of the Black Country, that was held in the museum's Folkes Park marquee throughout kind of the spring-summer period. It actually ends tomorrow to make way for our summer holiday programme. And in the marquee, we had a display of 1950s Black Country made cookware, and we had a festival fair themed cookery demonstration. And here you can see me getting very excited when Simon and I went to see the festival style text panels that have been produced for this mini exhibition. It was quite an exciting process going through that, writing the text in not only the style of the Festival of Britain, but also in a way that was kind of clear for a 21st century audience. The way in which the festival guides and a lot of the text around the festival was written is quite complex and unashamedly highbrow at times. So to try and kind of twist that into an accessible format for contemporary museum visitors was quite a challenge. And we've also got these lovely graphics that were based on a kind of print over poster template that was produced for the festival. So we tried to keep everything as authentic and in keeping with the look of the festival as we possibly could. So it was a fairly small exhibit, But we'd uncovered an awful lot of really rich information about the history of the festival in the Black Country. So it's really exciting for us to have this opportunity to share some of this research with you this evening. So with the talk, we're going to start. I'll hand over to Simon shortly, and he's going to give you a kind of quick introduction to the festival. We're guessing most people will already have a good idea, so it won't be kind of a comprehensive guide. Jane kind of very kindly provided that for us as our first lecture, and that lecture is available for you to view via the university's YouTube page. So we'll get a brief introduction, and then Simon will list his top 5 objects from the Festival of Britain that came from the Black Country. These are kind of a really broad mixture of different objects, and some of them are objects, I guess, in a looser sense. They could be buildings, they could be items manufactured in the Black Country. So we'll get Simon's top 5, and then Simon will also take a look at the festival in the Black Country and a couple of ways in which it was celebrated in the region. Then I'll take over and we'll have a look at the land travelling exhibition, which is perhaps the closest the official Festival of Britain got to the Black Country. And then we'll get my top 5 items from the land travelling exhibition that were made here in the Black Country as well. And we'll then kind of close with a kind of conclusion that brings it all together and really brings home why all of this matters. So I will just now hand over to Simon, and he will talk you through his top 5 Black Country objects in the Festival of Britain.
Cool. Thank you very much, Jen. I'm going to have to do the Chris Whitty style, please see my next slide thing. But so as Jen said, the Festival of Britain probably doesn't need a lot of introduction to you now. It's quite a familiar thing. This is a view drawn of the South Bank exhibition, which is really probably the most famous element of what people think of when they think of the Festival of Britain. It was intended as it was described in all sorts of ways. So as a kind of a tonic for the nation after years of war and then post-war austerity. Herbert Morrison, who was the Deputy Prime Minister and who was really behind setting it all up, described it as the British showing themselves to themselves and to the world. So it was inward looking at what makes us who we are and what we are, as well as outward looking to show the world just what we are capable of as a nation. So it's a very 1950s way of looking at it, has to be said. It's a lot of the focus is on national achievements and the great men that achieved it, that kind of school of history. If you've read David Edgerton's recent book on the British nation, his idea is that the 1950s and this kind of period represented the height of thinking about Britain as a nation, not just an empire or as something else, but as a nation, and that was really highlighted in the festival program. The festival guidebook was, as Jenny said, was very. It made no concessions to easiness to read or anything like that. When you're designing an exhibition poster, as we were, you're supposed to aim for something like the reading age of a 12-year-old or a Daily Mirror reader. So that's what we aimed for, but the writers of the guidebook had no such interest in that. So they were very content to be very didactic and very prescriptive with the way they wanted people to experience the exhibition. So you were intended to come to London, as millions and millions of people did, because it was a huge success, and go around in a particular way. So you would start just towards the back where the train comes in, and supposed to move your way around the pavilions into the dome and then across to the other side. On the upstream side, you have a section about the land, which is things like minerals and production and coal. In the dome, it was the Dome of Discovery, and it was all about exploration and modern science and the things that Britain had discovered. And then downstream, you had a kind of slightly more abstract set of pavilions about the British character and the British home and garden and that sort of thing. And I don't want to take you through a whistle-stop tour of some of these and how they relate to the Black Country before moving on to what sort of things we did in the Black Country itself. And particularly the theme that comes through is just how important manufacturing and industry was to the Black Country, which you sort of think goes without saying. You know, we're an industrial working class region, but it's worth reiterating, I think, that just the sheer diversity, the innovation that was found in the Black Country, the high skilled design that made it a really important manufacturing region and a really one central to Britain's recovery as an economy. David Kynaston, the historian, called the West Midlands the hub of a universe when he was talking about Britain's economy in the post-war period, and I think that really captures it really nicely. So Jenny, my first slide, please. The first one is the dome itself, which was one of the iconic pieces of architecture that went along with the festival, alongside the Skylon, which was the very tall, kind of thin tower. At its time, it was the largest dome in the world. It was 111 meters in diameter, 27 meters high, entirely constructed out of concrete and aluminium. The architect was Ralph Tubbs. The principal engineer was Ralph Freeman, who'd just come from his work on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. And the most exciting thing from my point of view anyway, is that it was manufactured by a Tipton company. So Horsley Bridge is a really, really old ironworks in the Black Country. That's how it started. It could trace its history back to 1792 when the colliery opened. It's just off kind of Upper Church Lane area in Tipton. They developed blast furnaces, as many places in the Black Country did, spurred on by things like the Napoleonic War and then the Industrial Revolution as it was ongoing. They moved into things like engines and hulls for iron ships, and probably that they're most famous for is bridges, hence the extension to their name. And if you've ever walked around the Black Country or Birmingham Canal network and seen a black and white bridge over the canal, then it's almost certainly one from Tipton, from the Horsley Bridge Company. It closed in 1846, but reopened shortly afterwards, and in the 1920s merged with a Birmingham firm of engineers called Thomas Pigott. By the post-war period, they were really specialising in this constructional engineering, and that was true of many companies in the Black Country. Actually, Rubery Owen is another famous example who did this kind of constructional engineering side of things. So they were doing bridges, gas holders, hydroelectric schemes, parts for aviation, aircraft hangars, bits of tanks and bombs, and all sorts of things. So they were contributed to the war effort as well, like many Black Country firms did, because it was a metalworking kind of region, and that's exactly what the war effort needed. So the productive capacity of the Black Country at the end of the war was absolutely crucial for the recovery of the British economy. So when the government asked firms to build for export, the Black Country was one of those places that was very much able to do that. So Black Country industry, I often think, is kind of the unsung side of things. Not so many people know that the Dome of Discovery was made by a Tipton firm, and it has a bit of a reputation as a slightly unglamorous place, let's say. And it makes the bits that go into the more showy things, bits of car that go into the assembly lines in Longbridge, that kind of thing. But it's a really important manufacturing region. It drove the economy of all sorts of the other parts of the West Midlands. So it was a really, really vital place. The Dome, by the way, was demolished by the Conservative government when they came in 1951 straight away. The aluminium was scrapped, and actually a lot of it was turned into letter openers as mementos that are sort of stamped with a bit of history of where it came from. So that's the Dome. Jen, can I have number 2, please? This one's an old one. So the Shot Tower was a tower that was already on the South Bank. The rest of it had been demolished, and it was old warehouses and tatty factories and things like that. It was demolished to make way for the festival. So this was the only old building that remained. It was from the Lambeth Lead Works, which was set up in the 1820s. And basically, you can find amazing videos of the process online. Basically, you just drop molten lead from the very top of the tower. And by the time it reached the bottom, it had cooled and hardened into shot to go in shotguns. It was out of use by this time, but was repurposed for the sake of the festival. And it had a radio telescope and an optical lighthouse built on top. Now, if you needed a lighthouse in 1951, there's really only one place that you would bother going to, and that was Chance glassworks in Smethwick on Swan Lane. The building is still there. Their lighthouse had the power of 3 million candles, and it could shine light for 45 miles across London. So it's really quite something. Now, Chance built lighthouses for all over the world, and their legacy is a really, really impressive thing. They had been founded in the 1820s as well, when Robert Lucas Chance took over an existing glassworks, and he turned it into one of the biggest in the country very swiftly. They were pioneers in things like plate glass and window glass. So they produced glass for the clock on Big Ben, for the White House in the US, and for the first great exhibition in London in 1851, of which the Festival of Britain was a centenary exhibition. So that was something that was part of the interpretation here, that they had a hall where you could see a model of the original Crystal Palace from the Great Exhibition, and Chance had made the glassworks, and actually the ironworks was also made in the Black Country for that. By this period, Chance had moved into all sorts of other things as well. So I've mentioned optical glass, that's lenses and things like that. And so it's estimated that at one point about 90% of lenses in Hollywood were all made by Chances in Smethwick, which is just phenomenal, really. Things like telescopes and cameras, lighthouses and cathode ray tubes for TV, which was just about to take off. What I could have mentioned about Horsley Bridge is that they also built the girders for the TV transmitter at Sutton Coldfield. So if you'd got TV for the very first time in time for the festival or in time for the coronation a couple of years later, you'd be getting your signal from the Sutton Coldfield transmitter. So we had our part in that as well. Chance also made tableware, some beautiful festivalware that we've got in our collection at the museum. So it was an old industry, and one which had very deep roots and had a very strong reputation, but it was also extremely forward-looking. And I think that's another key point about Black Country industry at this point, is that it was not just metal bashing anymore. Not that it ever really was, but it was particularly not this time. It was all about innovation, product design, and meeting the needs of a changing scientific world. Number 3, please, Jem. This one's a bit more prosaic, perhaps. After you've been through the Dome of Discovery, you'd come on to one of the Homes and Gardens exhibitions, and these were all about modern design, about solutions for modern living, about space saving and things like that. And they showcased a variety of appliances and furniture designs and things like that. So this is really where the modern design element of the festival, I think, is at its peak. In this picture, we have a set of bathroom scales by Salters, which is still a very familiar name. Salters was founded in 1760 in Bilston, but it made its name as with a huge factory on West Brom High Street, actually the tallest building in the town. They moved into things like springs and then into scales, and that's what they became kind of most famous for. In fact, in 1898, they installed a weighing machine in the toilets in the House of Commons. That was actually probably the first bathroom scales there was. So that's innovation, if you want it. The other thing they were also famous for, I should point out, is that their cricket club, the well-established cricket club, formed a football team, the Strollers, and they went on to become West Bromwich Albion. So their legacy is kind of multifaceted in West Brom. And you can get into long argument with one of our demonstrators, John, who's chairman of the West Brom Supporters Association, about where all the various nicknames came from. He claims that the nickname of the baggies comes from the baggy trousers that the workmen wore at Salters, and he's less sure about the kind of the shout of boing boing coming from the springs, but I choose to believe that one because that's a really nice story. This was displayed in the child in the home part of the exhibit, but you can find Black Country items all throughout the home life. Jen, can I have the next slide, actually, please? This is another picture from that, a set of cookers, and this is really where domestic life was presented as this very important thing, and actually it was really relevant to how people understood industry and things like economic policy and national and local pride, because it was all wrapped up in the things that we made, and the innovation and the pride we took in making the things. So the cooker nearest to you, I'm pretty sure, is the one is made by Cannon of Coseley. They were known as probably the best cookers you could buy. We've been very lucky to talk to an amazing guy called Ernie, who's going to be 100 in a few months, and he went to work in 1936 at the gas showroom in West Brom, and he swore by Cannon as the best cookers you could get throughout his career at working for West Bromwich Gas Department and then for British Gas. That was another old firm. It was founded in the 1820s. They did pots and pans and things like that, but then diversified into radiators and then famously gas fires and gas cookers, which really took off in the 20s and 30s when there was a boom in municipal and private house building, and people were able to afford things like that. They got all sorts of exciting innovations in like the high level grill that you can see here. That was something they made quite a lot of, and they produced cookbooks to go with it and all sorts of exciting things. This was part of the homes and gardens display at the festival as well. Can I have the next slide, Jim? This is where I can bring in some of what they called in the program a constellation of events. So there was, as well as the main events in London, they were able to do events all over the country, in towns and cities across Britain. They even had a seaborne exhibition, as you can see. They had a festival ship which toured around to port cities as well. Across the country, there were competitions and contests and all sorts of things run. So every town ran some sort of program of events, of concerts, of sports days, of even things like Thanksgiving services in the church. It's worth probably bearing in mind that this was only 6 years after the end of World War II. People were still very grateful for having come through that, and the seeds of recovery were starting to be seen in the country. So if we have the next slide, we can see one of those events. This is Mrs. Betty Morris from Gladys Road in Smethwick. The food in the 1950s, in the early 1950s, is probably the epitome of what people think of when they think British food is bad. That's probably fair to say. We're still in the depths of austerity. Rationing was still central to government policy. In fact, Labour were campaigning to continue rationing on even after even longer than the Conservatives wanted to. There were shortages. Things like bread and potatoes were rationed for the first time after the war. Government tried to meet the need by introducing foods like whale meat and snook, which is a kind of a type of oily fish, which was deeply unpopular. The government became a laughing stock for it. But people were trying their best with what they could do. And one of the ways they could do that was by competing in the Festival Fair competition, which was run by the Women's Gas Federation. It was a national competition, and the aim was to demonstrate the honest and straightforward British tradition, not disguised with garlic or spices, but good wholesome cooking, uncamouflaged. And I love that quote, because it's they've managed to praise British cooking and getting in a sly dig at everywhere else's cuisine as well. So there had heats nationally. Betty Morris spotted the adverts in the window of the gas showroom in Smethwick, and while she was on her way back from the infant welfare centre with her baby. She hadn't cooked before she got married, and she married fairly recently, but had gone to evening classes and had learned to cook and tested things out on her husband, and entered this on a whim. She had to drop off a county fruit cake to the recipe you can see there, and it obviously pleased the judges, and she got through to the regional semis, where she had to produce an Atlantic fish pie and a meringue fruit flan, and then to the national finals at a hotel in London, where she got to meet Princess Elizabeth, who had become the Queen, and produce a dinner based on guinea fowl. And it was judged by people from the WI and Philip Harbin, who was one of the first celebrity chefs. So it was quite a big deal, really. She sadly didn't come in the top 3 or anything, but she did pretty well. She's our champion. She was our champion of the Midlands, and she was one of the characters that we chose to interpret as a costume character for for our exhibition in the park. So the festival was very much designed to show off what Britain could produce and what it could build, and that was just as true at a local level, where each of the contestants had to use a different type of cooker so that all the different kinds of cookers could be showed off. But it's worth bearing in mind, I think, in this, they are still living in a world of austerity and rationing, where things are a little bit old-fashioned and nobody is willing to use exotic things like garlic or spices. So although we often think about the Festival of Britain in terms of its modernity and what the impact it had on modern design, actually you could also see it as kind of this last blast of an older style of domestic life as well. Jen, next one, please. The other one I want to focus on, the event from the backcountry, is the Pageant of Dudley. Pageants have been massively popular for the last 50 years at this point, and really this was the last hurrah, the last wave of really popular historical pageants, because they were huge events. These took place this one took place in Dudley Castle. We have a wonderful scrapbook in our collection at the museum by the vicar of Holly Hall Church in Dudley, who got roped in by his wife to be part of the pageant, and he wrote it down in he wrote his experiences down in the scrapbook. So we've got that first person point of view of someone who was, I think he was the Friar of Wenlock in one of the scenes, and he describes how it began in 1950 as a mild argument in the council when they were discussing what they should do, and gradually grew from there. The script was produced by a writer called Grace Carlton, who was local, I believe, and wrote out basically a series of episodes of the history of Dudley. So right from the earliest days, and including things like the visit of Queen Elizabeth to Dudley Castle and things like that when there were still royals. There was a character called Smith, who was always there to represent the ordinary everyday man, as well as all the kind of the highfalutin characters. The council received the script by Mrs. Carlton and wanted to review some of it, and they organised a meeting with her. Were determined to go in and make some serious changes and kind of tell her off as to the direction. They got in there and realised she was a frail little old lady, and they didn't really want to change anything, so her script went through unchanged. They put an advert in the Stage magazine for a producer, and it was answered by Gwen Lally, who you can see pictured here. Now, she's an amazing character, and I do recommend that you go and learn a little bit about the life of Gwen Lally. She was a professional producer of pageants, and the vicar that I mentioned speaks of Gwen Lally, or the Lally as he calls her, with a kind of mixture of admiration and awe and slight terror, because she sounds like a formidable character, but also an amazing wit. She brought her mascot megaphone with her, which had all the names of the pageants that she produced on it. She called on Mrs. Naylor, the vicar's wife, to take part, because she'd organised a play at St. Augustine's Church the year before. So Joyce Naylor got swiftly involved in that. And she was called in specifically because there was an episode about friars and monks and things that Gwen Lally wanted her to be part of. And that included a huge amount of preparation. As you can imagine, you can see the whole set being built within the grounds of Dudley Castle there. But they had to find things like props and costumes. So most people had to make their own costumes, and there was a cast of literally hundreds for all of these different scenes. My favourite fact about it is that they needed a bishop's crozier and 60 swords. So the vicar wrote to the Earl of Dudley and asked him whether he would be willing to let the Round Oak Steel Works produce them for them. And the Earl answered back, fine, if you can provide some steel. So Mrs. Naylor wrote to a steel providing firm in West Brom, got the steel delivered to Round Oak. They made 60 swords out of it and a bishop's crozier. Jen, next slide, please. Here is said bishop's crozier. And they went on to put on this amazing performance. I think it probably the costs overran by miles, and as these things tend to do. But it was hugely popular despite the weather, and it was a real spectacular event. The last one I think that was produced in the Black Country, probably because it was so expensive. It's a fascinating history. I'm a massive fan of Gwen Lally. She's there's some amazing photos of her in that scrapbook, dressed as a French gentleman, and in those costumes you can see. In fact, she often dressed in men's clothing of the time and had a permanent female companion that she lived with. So although we can't put words or feelings into her mouth, she's often thought of in terms of her twisting of gender expectations right through from the 1920s when she first started working. She's amazing. So that's my point, I suppose, with this one, is that even local events linked into these bigger national stories and into local industry. Round Oak, of course, was just about to be nationalised as part of the Labour government's outgoing plans, and then it was re-privatised a couple of years later and went to, rather than being the Earl of Dudley's works anymore, it became part of the Tube Investments Group, which is another story. And again, we see that overlap between the old-fashioned way of doing things where the vicar could write to the Earl and the new modern way of doing things. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Jen to go to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Simon. You may notice a bit of a theme emerging, and that theme is pictures of researchers holding a long and pointy metal object, but more on that shortly. Anyway, so as I mentioned at the top of the presentation, the closest the festival's official programme got to the Black Country was through the Land Travelling exhibition. And that visited Birmingham between the 4th and 25th of August 1951. It was a huge and elaborate portable exhibition, and it was hosted at Birmingham's Bingley Hall, which I believe this was located near today's ICC Symphony Hall area. I think it burnt down in around 1963, so we no longer have that structure there. And people from the Black Country would have certainly travelled to see the travelling exhibition. There were special offers like reduced rail tickets that were made available for people who were travelling from within 80 miles of the festival site. And it's estimated that around 75,000 people visited the Land Travelling exhibition whilst it was in Birmingham. And you can see here that at the time, it was the world's biggest transportable covered exhibition. So you had the Land Travelling exhibition that travelled around sort of industrial heartland cities. And then you also had the festival ship Compania that travelled around the coast, visiting sort of coastal cities as well. And people could visit the exhibition on board the ship. So the festival visited 4 of the main inland centres of industry: Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham and Nottingham. And this is a lovely quote from the festival guide. The things that will be seen in this exhibition are not ordinary, average products, but some of the best that this country is producing at the present time. They are things that we can be proud of, that can inspire us and fill us with confidence for the future. And I think that way of looking at objects produced in the Black Country is a really nice way of kind of framing it. We think of a lot of the things that are produced in the region as being quite ordinary, quite mundane, kind of mass-produced products, but actually, you know, these were things that we could be proud of. So the Land Travelling exhibition itself was divided into 6 thematic sections. You had material and skill, discovery and design, people at home, people at play, people at work, and people travel. And the exhibition featured around 3,000 different items that were transported around those 4 industrial cities. And the idea was that there would be an element of similarity with the South Bank exhibition. It was a different proposition, but it had some sort of parallels with what was going on the South Bank. So the idea was that people from the further flung cities could get that experience closer to home. And what I love about the guidebook is this map. I don't think I've ever seen quite as confusing map for a visitor guidebook in my life. It reminds me of one of those sort of maze puzzles you used to do in puzzle books as a kid. And again, I think that sort of shows how uncompromising the tone and the visual aesthetic of the festival was. That, you know, they didn't really make concessions for things being accessible or easy to follow. So you've got this wonderful green and black map of the land travelling exhibition with a kind of key that helps you vaguely to orientate yourself. But again, the idea was you would travel through in a specific order and experience the different themes in that set order. So as I mentioned, the next 5 objects are all objects that were taken from the catalogue for the land travelling exhibition. So earlier this year, Simon and I were going through the catalogues and we were listing objects that featured in the exhibition that were manufactured in the Black Country. So I've gone through and I've picked, I guess, quite a personal list of my 5 favourite objects from the land travelling exhibition that came from the Black Country. I just need to warn you, I've tried to get hold of images of the objects, but it's been really, really difficult. So I've had to use kind of images for illustration purposes as opposed to images of the exact object themselves. But it would be great to try and find out exactly what those objects were, what they look like, where they are now as well. But that would just take kind of an extra phase of research. So I'm going to start off with a saddle, and unsurprisingly, this was made in Walsall, a town that is renowned for its saddlery and leather trade. So the saddle that was included in the exhibition was made by the company Javelin, who also provided a bridle, a rugby ball and a football for the People at Play section of the exhibition. Javelin had been trading since 1873, and they sadly closed their doors in 2014. But as you can see from that, it was kind of a long and productive history for the company. And the 1950s in particular were a very challenging time for the leather industry. A lot of artificial leather products, kind of cheaper and perhaps not as well made products, were coming to market, and they were threatening the Walsall leather industry. However, it was a case where craftsmanship and quality really did win out. And today, Walsall still has a small but really kind of high-end leather and saddlery trade. An interesting fact about Javelin is, sorry, I'll just wait for that siren to go past. Okay, that's gone. So an interesting fact about Javelin is that in the 1920s, they invented the globe non-tear football. And what makes this football special is that it went on to be used in 4 FA Cup finals and the 1928 Olympics. So these kind of huge events, a little bit of the Black Country was there and central to proceedings. So we're going to stay in Walsall for object number 7, but it's perhaps something a little more glamorous, a cocktail shaker. The shaker that was featured in the land travelling exhibition was made by Elkington & Co of Walsall. We don't know what the shaker in the exhibition looked like, but I'm going to take a guess that it would have been silver plated, as that was Elkington's speciality. They pioneered the electroplating of silver during the 1830s and 1840s. They'd exhibited at the Great Exhibition of 1851 and enjoyed great success there. They'd moved from Birmingham to Walsall at this point. And so I really want to, this is one of the objects I really do want to try and track down and work out what it looked like, what the exact Elkington cocktail shaker was. And I really like it with Elkington, as they are one of those Birmingham Black Country firms that you will spot in museum collections around the country. I was up in Sheffield last weekend. There was Elkington on display in their metalwork galleries. The V&A has a huge kind of Elkington collection as well. So it's just a really kind of big and bold Black Country Birmingham design story, as well as an industrial one. So you've mixed yourself your drink, and now you need something to pour it into. Look no further than good old Brierley Hill. Stourbridge and Brierley Hill glass was hugely prominent in both the South Bank exhibition and the land travelling exhibition. There was also an exhibition of local glass held at Stourbridge Town Hall in June 1951 to coincide with the festival, and also to celebrate 350 years of glassmaking in the area. At the South Bank site, there was a display of Stourbridge glass in the Power and Production Pavilion. And it's really nice. There are actual kind of lots of novelty items produced for the festival by the glass blowers and engravers of Stourbridge and Brierley Hill. There were competitions held to see who could produce the most elaborate and the most complex items. I should have popped a picture in actually of this, but there is a wonderful, it's kind of one of those things that's both wonderful and, I'm not going to say hideous, it's the sort of object that I perhaps wouldn't want in my own home, but I can appreciate the craftsmanship in it. It's a goblet, and in the stem of the glass they've encased 2 glass die as well, and this would have been incredibly complicated, and it was a showcase for the glass makers of Stourbridge and Brierley Hill, and that was produced especially for the Festival of Britain. So the land travelling exhibition Brandy Glass was made by Stevens and Williams, who also produced glass branded as Royal Brierley Crystal, having received the royal warrant from George V in 1919. But there were also glassware objects on display from Thomas Webbs and Son and Stourbridge Glass Co. Again, I'm not 100% certain what this brandy glass looked like. Again, so if anyone has got any ideas, then please do get in touch with us and let us know. Object number 9 is a javelin made by Oldbury's, Accles and Pollock. And this is one of my favourites. Accles and Pollock specialised in the production of tubular metal. So it follows that they would also make javelins. And it turns out that the 1950s were a period of transformation for the javelin making industry. It was a period where they shifted away from wooden javelins with sharp metal tips towards entirely metal designs, which is likely what was included in the land travelling exhibition. So the Accles and Pollock javelin was exhibited along with an archery bow and arrows, a fly fishing rod. It was exhibited with an archery bow and arrows and a fly fishing rod. And it was featured again in the People at Play Zone. And I got really excited when I found out that there's a lovely connection with the Black Country Living Museum's collection. And here it is, part 2 of our series, Researchers Holding Long and Pointy Metal Objects. This is what I believe to be kind of a 1990s Accles and Pollock javelin. It was donated to the museum in 2016. And thank you to the collections team at the museum for letting me go down to the stores and kind of handle this. I need to find out more about this object, and mainly because it's autographed. It's signed by a Russell Jones. I've started to look into who Russell Jones might be, and I'm not having a huge amount of luck at the moment. One would assume they were a javelin thrower, but again, my sort of searches into kind of regional javelin throwers hasn't turned up much yet. So if anyone does have any ideas, please let me know in the comments or in the Q&A at the end. And finally, object number 10, we're going to end with another one of my favourites. And this is a ceramic porcupine from Basil Matthews Studios at 28A Darlington Street, Wolverhampton. Now, of course, this is not the actual porcupine. I cannot tell you the hours I have spent searching online for the Basil Matthews porcupine, and it has not come up anywhere. There's loads of Basil Matthews ceramic figurines available online. I even managed to find hedgehogs, which aren't too far away, but sadly they're not quite porcupines. So I've been unable to track down the exact object, but Basil Matthews was a self-taught potter and ceramicist, and he was renowned for his ceramic animal figurines. And his work was reportedly massively admired by none other than Queen Mary. Now, I will admit that Matthews' work is perhaps an acquired taste. There's, in my mind, quite a cute and playful 1950s quality to the figures, though they may be a little sentimental and kitsch for some. But I just like this idea that these kind of quite whimsical decorative objects, it wasn't just heavy industry. These kind of little artistic creations were being produced in the Black Country as well. So that brings our whistle-stop tour of the Festival of Britain's Black Country Connections to a close. And just to tie this together with an attempt at a conclusion, I think the Festival of Britain, and Simon and I kind of spoke about this earlier actually, we both think the festival provides us with a chance to reappraise the Black Country's contribution to post-war Britain. And as I was just saying, it's not just about the industry, it is about the design that goes into these products. And it's very much about putting the Black Country on the world stage. And Simon shared that wonderful Herbert Morrison quote, and we're going to kind of twist that or paraphrase that somewhat. It was about the Black Country showing themselves to themselves and the world. So just hand over quickly to Simon now, as he's got a few words.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to plug. A lot of what we've been talking about Black Country industry and design and the society in general, you can find in this new book. So this book started life as the research for our new development at the Black Country Living Museum, which is called Forging Ahead. And it's a project to build a town centre and an industrial area to extend our historic environment and tell the story of the Black Country in the post-war years. So from 1945 to about 1968. We've chosen this as a period of great change and great overlap between the old and the new. So 1968 we chose because it was when the last coal mine in the Black Country was shut at Bagridge. But this is not a story of decline. As we've been talking about, Black Country remained an extremely successful industrial region. It's my feeling that really nobody in the Black Country in 1968 really would have been looking forward to the future with great trepidation about the period of industrial change that would follow in the next 15 years or so. This was still a time when industry was successful, when people's wages went up and therefore living standards went up and people were a bit more affluent, and thus developed youth culture and all sorts of things. So this is the research that went into informing our project, and I'm very grateful to the Museum of History for West Midlands for the opportunity to publish it. So you'll be able to buy that at the museum's bookshop, at the publisher's website, which is www.historywm.com, or bookshops and Amazon as well. Thanks very much for the opportunity to plug that.
Okay, so hand over to Jane now for questions.
Hi, well, we haven't got any at the moment, so just to encourage questions and comments, that would be great. Obviously, I've got a ton of questions, so which is lucky for me. I think what I've been really struck by in your talk, which thank you so much, it was so interesting, was about the emphasis on objects. And I think there is such, I mean, the fact that both of you have work at the Black Country Living Museum, I think is so important, because the material history, the physicality of these objects and these really quite ordinary objects, and how they give us a glimpse of things that are otherwise lost in history is so important. I mean, I don't know if yourself and Simon would like to talk a little bit more about that, because I think it's such a fascinating area.
Yeah, I guess for me, there's this idea that even the most ordinary objects can be quite spectacular and quite special, and can open up a world of stories and lives lived. And yeah, I mean, I started off as a dress historian, and that idea that a garment doesn't have to be high end to have beautiful, high quality memories and evocative kind of qualities to it. And I think that applies across kind of material culture and across the world of objects as well. So yeah, those items, you know, that Basil Matthews pottery, you know, it's the sort of stuff that some people would just dismiss, but I just think it's wonderful. It is playful, and it is fun, and it's unashamedly sentimental, and that's great. You know, it's the stuff that people could imagine sitting in the nan's living room, and those memories that you get from those objects are just, yeah, wonderful.
It feels very intimate, doesn't it, as a history, I think. We've got a question. So this is from John. Thank you both. That was Boston. Is there much surviving print culture of the festival in the Black Country? I'm thinking of exhibition catalogues, pageant programmes, posters, etc. I mean, that would be a wonderful find. Have you come across anything like that?
For the pageant, yes, but we have a really good collection of related items in the museum. We've got the script, we've got newspaper press cuttings and scrapbooks, and this wonderful scrapbook with those amazing photos in. And that's really well documented, especially for any kind of pageant, really, to have that kind of personal viewpoint on it as well is really special. Other than that, it's really more about what was reported in newspapers that I'm familiar with as well, that the kind of series of events and things like that. So while there were these big showpiece events like the festival at the South Bank and the Javelin one, the local events tended to be more not spontaneous, what's the word I'm looking for, activity based, I guess. So it was things like concerts and sports days and things like that. So there's posters and things surviving, and newspaper reports and things like that, but to my knowledge, not much more than that.
I mean, obviously we'd welcome if anyone's got any in their lofts or anything like that. I mean, any of that is such important stuff.
One of the challenges we face at the museum is that until recently we've set our collecting limit at about 1950, because we've told the story of the Black Country up until World War II, and with a few exceptions we've limited up to about 1950. And of course, obviously we're changing that now, but there are things which we don't have the breadth of collection for, and that's for post-war stories, including objects, artworks, press cuttings, archives, and all sorts of things. So absolutely, you're right. We'd be very happy to acquire more of those and to improve our collection of those.
There's also, just picking up on that, I think Dudley Archives have got the catalogue for the glass exhibition that was held at Stourbridge Town Hall. And also on the 17th of August, we've got a talk from the artist Sean McFarlane, who's done a lot of work on the festival pageant that was held in Walsall. And I believe she found the script for that in her research. So I suspect there's going to be quite a bit of stuff out there, but it's not being brought together in a kind of cohesive whole or through that frame necessarily of the Festival of Britain even. It's kind of scattered around various archives as well. But yeah, I need to get into the archives and see the glass documents, definitely.
So, I mean, places like Beattie's had their own display, didn't they, in 1951? And, you know, I think that would be fascinating because I think Beattie's archives still in existence, isn't it? Any other questions? Oh, we've got a question from Lynn. Is there a log of who donates items to the Black Country Living Museum? If so, the donor of the Javelin or some descendants may have details of Russell Jones.
I've got a feeling that might be my mom. If not, I'm sorry. But yeah.
Oh, it is a Gilbert. It is a Gilbert, yes.
Hi, Mom.
Thanks, Mom.
So yeah, with this we do know who donated it, but that would be probably the next kind of, it's just double checking as well that no one at the museum already has the answer to that, because you can never quite be sure, you know, that someone else might just randomly know, oh yeah, that was so and so. So I just need to ask around a little bit, but we do have the name of the donor in the catalogue as well. But with that, the earlier you go back sometimes with objects, the less information tends to have been kind of stored along with them as well. And the types of information changes as well that was kind of collected. So yeah, we do know who donated it. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but yeah, that's a good lead to sort of follow up. And yeah.
I mean, the donor stories I've found with my work at Platt Hall, the donor stories are so fascinating as to why they even had the thing in the first place, that I mean, they're often a real kind of narrative.
We've been collecting a lot of oral histories as well, so kind of extended interviews to go with the project, to link in particularly with the buildings that we're building and everything, but very often those have come along with objects, and that's something that's been able to add a great depth to the collection, rather than just having a piece of paper which says this was donated by so and so, and their memories of such and such are a few bullet points, and we've got an extended hour or two interview with someone about their life, their context, their workplace, the why they have the thing, and we can apply that to photo collections as well. And that's I don't know, there's other people doing that same work with other photo collections as well. So like curators and researchers of the future, you are welcome. But that's the sort of thing we're doing to go along with our project now.
No, that's brilliant, because yeah, so much can be lost without that, and including really important information about the object in particular. I don't know, Jen, if you'd like to finish, because we're just about running out of time. Thank you to questions and thank you for attending, but we've just got some information about the next talks.
There we go. So yeah, our next talk is with none other than Dr. Jane Webb, who wonderfully, I've noticed, has matched her top to her Festival of Britain background as well.
Always coordinating.
So on Thursday, the 5th of August at 7 p.m, Jane will be talking about the festival's design legacy in Wolverhampton. And I believe that's specifically looking at the Wolverhampton Market Hall.
The retail market, yeah. So I'm going to look very specifically at the things that were said in the festival in terms of town planning and how that was transcribed onto a Wolverhampton setting.
Wonderful, can't wait for that. And then on Tuesday the 17th of August, as I just mentioned, 7 p.m, we're joined by the artist Sean McFarlane, who will be talking about the Festival of Britain in Walsall. But it's going to be a little bit different, as she's talking about it from her perspective as an artist, kind of creating works inspired by the Festival of Britain as well. And so that'll be a really kind of different angle on the Festival of Britain, again with that sort of rooting in the Black Country. If you want to book onto these events, please visit blackcountrystudiescentre.co.uk and click on events, and you'll find the links there where you can book tickets for those. I've got anything else? I think that's
I also put the ArtsFest connection in the website in the Q&A early on in the session. So if you want to have a look into that, then that's got a link as well. Either way will get you there.
Wonderful, thank you, Jane. So I was thinking I put the links there, but no one can click on them.
No.
Okay.
Brilliant. So I'd just like to thank Simon and Jen. They've been absolutely fantastic tonight. Everything's finished on time, so people have been very good in terms of how they've coordinated things. And thanks for coming in from the audience as well. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much to everyone, and see you all soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.